Hey, Shawn, welcome to the show. As we're getting started, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Brian. Enjoy being here. So I'm Shawn O'Shaughnessy. I'm currently the Chief Revenue Officer for Agile Stack Software, which is a startup company based in California. I'm in the Midwest, though, because I cover the entire world, so I can be anywhere, right? But I have a long history of selling enterprise IT solutions, worked for a lot of big companies that are pretty much names everybody's heard of on your program.
It was kind of weird that before I looked at your profile, I was expecting an Irish accent.
A lot of people say that, but I'm a seventh generation Irish. I got a lot of German blood in me as well.
Yeah.
Got a little bit of French blood, but I'm seventh generation. My first O'Shaughnessy that came over on the boat was back in like 1820, 1830, something like that. So it's been a long time. So no, I don't even look like an Irishman. I got gray hair, of course, but I had blonde hair originally.
You could pass as an Irishman. But yeah, because you spell your name the same way my brother does. And,
yes,
so we grew up, everyone calling him Scene.
Yeah,
right? I'm sure you experienced that.
Absolutely. Thank goodness for Sean Connery. I think I'm actually named after Sean Connery. I think my mother got, rest in peace. I think my mother had a crush on Sean Connery when she was a young woman.
And how'd you get into sales?
So my father was a salesperson. My brother was a salesperson. I was originally trained as a mechanical engineer, but I realized that I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer. So my last day of being a mechanical engineer is when I walked across the stage and got that diploma. I immediately went into sales, went to a really great program put out by Alan Bradley, which was a whole year of sales training. I had 11 months of sales training. It was almost like getting a master's in sales. And I never looked back. I never wanted to really be a mechanical engineer. I was much more on the business side. I'm technically aptitude, but I just enjoy selling. I enjoy being with people, and I definitely don't like being stuck in the office like I am now with this stupid COVID thing, right? So I can't go see customers.
You miss the traveling?
I do. When you're traveling, you hate it.
Right.
But when you don't travel, after doing it so long, it's like it just feels wrong. My suitcase is dusty.
Yeah. That's it. You get used to looking at bad TVs and bad hotel food and
exactly.
waking up not knowing where you are.
Exactly. But I think the biggest thing is my wife is like, get out of the house.
Yeah. So what do you like about sales?
So I like to solve customer problems, right? So I'm a big believer that salespeople, our goal is to influence the decision-making process of our prospects, right? And have them make that decision on our time frame and make the right decision in our opinion, right? But I do that primarily for just hanging out with the customer, trying to understand what their goals are, how they're missing their goals, how they're not achieving what they want to achieve, and then trying to figure out how my products are going to help them get there. And if it doesn't do that, then I move on. But my whole goal is if the customer's trying to accomplish something, how can I help them accomplish it? And much more of very much a solution sales, and that's a very common thing to say. But solution, how do I solve your problem? Talk about the business benefits. I'm also very quick to say, I can't help you, but maybe Joe down the street can. And, I'll reference a friend or a buddy that sells something else if I can't help them. And I don't try to force fit anything. Customers are too precious to force fit something bad.
And do you feel growing up with a parent and a family that was kind of sales oriented helped you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when I was a young man, I used to sell fruits and vegetables off of a table in the fruit and vegetable market, the farmer's market kind of stuff. And my dad said, you should never be in anything but sales. Unfortunately, you're really good at math, so go be an engineer, but you're really a salesperson. So I got a lot of encouragement growing up. I saw the ups and downs of sales, right? I remember, my dad wouldn't sell something. He sold heavy construction equipment. I remember him not selling something for a couple months, especially during the winter, and them having to deal with that budget problem that happens when you're doing that. He was primarily commission only, so that was a really tough life that he dealt with. But he did really well as a career. He had a long career. He was very, very successful. And so it gave me that comfort that I can do this and I can be a successful salesperson. Very few people, except for especially in enterprise IT sales are commission only, but there's still the ups and downs. There's those times where orders aren't coming in, and then the end of the Q4, in our business, that's just, you can't sleep.
haymaking.
It's got to get done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm commission only now, but I certainly remember the roller coaster, because it's not only the pressure you put on yourself, but the pressure the company puts on you.
Exactly.
And trying to manage that, not get too excited when things are going well.
Exactly.
Have it go to your head, and not get too desperate when things aren't going well.
And the other thing is to do things that are still going to be farther out, so that you really can deaden the ups and downs of that, right? So as an enterprise in IT sales, you have to really think ahead and be proactive and worry about what deal am I going to be closing in 6 months, because my sales cycle can be 6 to 12 months for many of my products, especially now in the products that I sell today. It's definitely 6 months plus. And if I'm not thinking about what's going to happen 6 months from today, then I'm going to be in trouble. Now, I'll be honest, nobody ever anticipated COVID screwing things up and screwing up all the buying decision cycles that I was going to have right now. But you have to be as proactive as possible when you're in sales, especially with long lead time products, where you just know that I'm going to have to sell to a dozen or 25 people in order for one person to say, in order to get all of them to say yes to get a customer to buy. Because in what I sell, one person's not making the decision, 25 people are making the decision, and I got to touch them all. And so I'm always got to be thinking ahead, that deal that I'm going to close in 6 months. That's very, very important. It's one of the things that I really push on my salespeople today, is try to be as proactive as possible, take the long road, get to know them, and those deals will happen. And that way you don't have the ups and downs too much in your commission revenue cycle.
And I was also raised by 2 salespeople. And I think what I learned through that process is to think like other people think.
Yeah.
And because they'd always kind of flip things on me to explain to me how the other person is viewing this.
Exactly. That's the whole benefit of trying to think about, what are your goals? What are the goals are they trying to achieve, right? So I'm an old guy. I've been around for a long time, and Miller Heiman solution selling was strategic selling, was the first thing that I learned from back when I was a young man, before I had all this gray hair. And, one of the things that they taught back then, so it was something I learned early on, was you sell by trying to figure out what the gap is between where you want to be and where you are. And Mr. Customer, where do you want to be and where are you now? And if that's a small gap, then I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if it's a big gap, that's the ones I'm going to spend time on. But that's also getting to know the customer's business, understanding how do they make money, how do they lose money. I think that's actually in a larger enterprise sale like I do, how companies actually lose money or how they don't succeed is a really good thing to know when you're understanding your customer. So trying to figure out how to help them achieve those goals and minimize those gaps is really important.
And how have you found it going from individual contributor to manager, and sometimes back and forth a couple of times?
Yeah, so that I probably am a better salesperson than I am a manager. I have to remember, so I had a really good manager a few years ago as I was starting to make this transition into being a manager. And he's like, I used to play sports when I was a young man, like a lot of salespeople do, right? But he's like, your coach never ran on the court and shot the free throw for you, right? So all he did is he taught you how to shoot the free throw, taught you your technique, criticized you, yelled at you, made you do layups and do sprints even you screwed up. But he never went out during the game and shot the free throw for you, right? So that's the way you have to be as a manager. You got to do all that work in advance, and then you just got to let them go, and you got to see how they do, and then give them critiques afterwards. And that advice I still live on because I still love sports. The whole idea of the coach doesn't play, the coach coaches, and the players play and they don't coach, right? So as long as I remembered that, I've always been good, and I try really, really hard not to take over a sales cycle when I'm working with a sales rep. I try hard to just keep my mouth shut. We'll talk about it after the meeting. We'll talk about it after. We'll talk about before the next meeting. But I try to be very careful about remembering I'm the coach. I'm not the player, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's be honest, the end of the quarter, I'm going to be LeBron James. I'm going to be Michael Jordan. Give the ball to me.
You don't
I'm going to
post
make a shot.
right. Yeah, and that's kind of understandable because it's not purely coaching. It's kind of player coaching and a somewhat, especially in big deals.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Because you want your reps to pull you in to talk to their peer, the
Exactly
manager.
right.
Right.
Exactly right.
So that's
And that's a really important thing to remember, that they need to have the relationships, that there's some relationships maybe I should have. And maybe there's some relationships our CTO or our vice president of engineering, they should have, right, with the customer. So that multifaceted, multi-pronged attack is important to keep track of as well. So everybody's going to play a role on the team, right? But once again, Michael Jordan said, when 3 seconds left in the game is on the line, give me the ball, I'll take care of it, right? So,
and that's, the first year I really knocked it out of the park. I was lucky enough to have a great relationship with the CEO, co-founder of the company. And I just say, Paul, come on out for a week. Yeah. And we would hit everything. And the guy was charismatic, knowledgeable, and he could talk at that CEO level.
Yep.
Where at the time I was in my 20s and I'd shake like a leaf in front of a CEO. I didn't know what they cared about, but he could paint that vision from a business standpoint.
Yeah. And that's important, especially with a younger salesperson. You have to understand that, if they're calling on a person that's as old as their dad, maybe they just have a hard time relating to that. So in those cases, we need to tag team and take care of that situation. And the more you've made sales calls in your career, the more comfortable you get with that situation of, I'm going to talk to the CEO, I'm going to talk to the CIO of a company, and what am I going to say to that person? How am I going to relate to them, right? So the more you've made sales calls, you just got to do it, right? So there's only so much training we can do. There's so many books that we can watch, and so many podcasts, like watching your podcast. There's only so many you can do. So a lot of sales is just go do it, and you will get better as time goes on, as long as you think about, okay, what didn't work? Like, I did a presentation earlier today with my sales team, and we were talking to a customer, and there's some things that didn't go well. So afterwards, after all good sales calls, we got together, we talked about it as a team, what went well, what didn't we like. We talked about that one thing that didn't go well where we kind of screwed up, and we figured out what we're going to do next time if that would come up. And that's just part of sales. It's part of life. You're probably not going to blow a long-term deal like what we do by doing one silly thing in one meeting. You can recover from that, right? The goal is to not do 10 silly things in that one meeting, right? So,
and the challenge with larger complex deals is that you're not doing the same play every day.
Exactly right.
Right? You might not do that play for 3 months.
Right.
And so you're out of practice.
You're out of practice. So, yeah. So that is where, complex sales is a job that not everybody can do, because you do have to wing it a lot. You have to think on your feet. And it does take more effort to be successful, and to be successful year over year after year. Once again, that does come with just practice, but there's also just the confidence that I'm going to be okay. And it's also okay to say, Mr. Customer, I'm not quite sure about that one, right? Let me get back to you on that. And that even takes a degree of confidence in your own ability to say, I don't know, and that's not a personal affront on me that I don't know something. I'm going to have to go figure that out. I'm going to have to go talk to our developers or whatever. We're going to have to come back to you and talk. And that's perfectly fine, right? Everybody understands that, and nobody expects you to be an expert at everything.
And what was some of the kind of growth milestones as a rep that you went through that really changed how well you did?
Sure. So I can remember, the first time I closed $1 million deal, right? So as deals got bigger and bigger and more complicated, I definitely, back in those days, I was spending a lot of time with managers, right, on bigger deals, and the different things of learning how to do the negotiations, the give and take on the negotiations. All of those things were things that you learn little by little as you go along. And so you learn the first part of just being comfortable walking into a customer and spending time and really not having an agenda, right? Because not every sales call has to be an event. Some sales calls are just relationship building, right? I'm just going to have coffee with you and I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to learn about you as a person. Those are good things to do. Events are good, demos and whatever, but you got to do both so that the comfort of being able to do all of those together. Some people gravitate one to the other, right? Because just your personal philosophy. But then as you get accustomed to doing, negotiations with multiple people, how do I play one person against another in the same organization? That's always a fun job to do as well. Or in other cases, it's how do I tell them, this team over here is saying that, and that team is saying that. You guys got to talk to each other, and it's my job to put you together because my goal is to affect your decision. And by the way, I need that decision by the end of the quarter. Those are all the things that I have to work through. But the whole growth of doing multiple things, getting comfortable with those, and then you find out that, my manager just comes along to give me credibility, but I don't need him every day, right? And that's when you start saying, okay, now it's time for me to be a manager and coach other people in the process as well.
Yeah. How about as far as building up, like, intangible skills of like reading people, especially because you've sold to both technical people and business people. Right. And, people are optimistic, pessimistic, tell you what you want to hear, play you against the other competitors, want a bunch of free stuff.
Exactly. Well, and also the whole goal of trying to read an audience. So you do a presentation to a meeting, to a group of people, and you try to find out who's getting it, who's not getting it, who doesn't care, who is like this, and like, I'm not gonna ever get close to you, all those body signals. When you're a young salesperson, you may not recognize them. You may intuitively recognize some of them, but it's interesting to have a conversation after a meeting with a young salesperson and say, okay, what did you think happened? Who's your enemy in that room? Who didn't like what you had to say, right? Who's going to be your best friend in that room, right? Those kind of things you just have to learn those. Some of them come just because of who we are as a people, we can understand those things, but the innuendos are tough to do.
They are. And, because I always thought, especially with large complex sales, is how to spend your time and with who to spend your time.
Yes.
Because you don't have much time.
You don't have much time. Exactly. And,
especially you've worked with some popular companies where you probably got a lot of false positives.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really tough to say, they are liking this conversation because of the company I work for, right? Because sometimes my company can get me in a room, right? Or into a meeting. Sometimes, just the logo on my card will get me a meeting. Other companies I work for, not so well known, so I can't do that anymore. But that also leads a degree of credibility, right? So sometimes that logo helps you with credibility. Sometimes the logo doesn't give you any credibility. It's all got to come from you. And the other challenge, of course, in complex sales is the number of levels that you have to deal with in a corporation. We alluded to the dealing with the CIO and the VP and how are you going to do that, but also being able to relate to the guy on the ground that's actually going to use the product, because if he says no, the CIO is never going to say yes, right? So the guys, the lower down people, they're the naysayers, and you got to be able to relate to them as well. And so understanding their environment, understanding what I call it, breathing the same air that they breathe, right? So what do they do when they're not working? How do they relate? What's going on in the community that you're calling on, especially if you have a large territory? Like spending a little time, is that area of the country or is that area of the town, are they experiencing problem with their schools or whatever? Kind of being in touch. Never walk into a company where you don't have an idea what's going on in the company and what's going on in that community around the company, because all of that's going to affect that person. And the more you can talk about it, the better you are, right? So I travel a lot, as we alluded to earlier in our conversation, but I travel a lot. I always know what's going on in the city that I'm going to when I go there, right? If nothing more, I'm reading it on the plane as I get there, right? Because you just got to know, right?
There's no excuses anymore either.
There's no excuses.
You just get it on your phone.
Exactly. If you haven't looked at the press releases for the company you're going to go see, especially if it's a Fortune 500 style company, they may have made an announcement that morning. You should know that announcement, right? You might need to know that for the conversation. It may have affected your deal. If nothing else, it's a credibility. Hey, I see you announced this. How's that going for you guys? Or why did you do that? sometimes it's surprising when I'm telling them about what their company is doing, but that's okay too, right?
But it becomes a conversation point,
Exactly right.
and it shows your interest and your caring,
Exactly right.
which are
That's exactly right.
ingredients of trust.
Yes, exactly.
And you can also find out, can they afford what you sell?
Oh yeah,
Right?
that's a massive problem. That's that gap that I talk about. You might want it, but you don't have the money for doing it because something bad just happened to you, right? So
Yeah. And people, oh, how do you do that? It's like, are they hiring? Are they laying people off?
exactly.
You can see that they're funding based. If they're public, if they're private, you can tell, how many people do they have and what
Right.
kind of revenue do they have? It's typically out there in some form that you can reverse engineer.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Like I said, if you're walking into a Fortune 500 company, you probably should have read the annual report, not the entire thing. You don't have to be an investment expert
Right.
to make sales calls, right? But the CEO letter, yeah, it's probably a good thing for you to read. Every salesperson should read the CEO letter.
That's
What's
it.
important to this? I'll tell
And,
you what. Things that the CEO says in his letter that they're going to do the next year, those things are getting funded all the time, right?
Yep.
They never don't get funded, right?
Yep.
So if the CEO says we're really worried about security, and I don't sell security products, so let's just pretend that I did, right? But we're really worried about security because we got hacked last year. We're not going to let this happen. I've got my reputation online. Well, you better have that on your head, right? Because that's the thing that's going to get funded. And on the flip side, if you don't sell security and that's all he talks about in his CEO letter, well, good luck trying to get your deal funded and make it actually happen. And you got to be really questioning, is this really going to happen? Because you got this big thing that you have to do. CEO says you're going to buy another company. You're going to do a merger. Is that going to throw off my deal? Right? So those are things that you just have to pay attention to when you're doing complicated sales.
And how's your rep radar as far as being able to talk to another rep and get a sense of, do they really understand how to sell a large complex deal, or do they just have a nice personality?
Yeah, so I'll be honest. As a hiring manager, I've always think I've a lot of room to improve. Right, my belief is that I can train anybody to do it. Right, and what I've learned over the years of hard knocks is sometimes I can't train somebody how to do it. Right, so I can figure out when they're bullshitting me, because I was the king of bullshit back when I was a rep, right? So I could my boss always thought I had every answer, and that was fine, right? So I know how to interpret that, but what I don't know sometimes is the guy's just not going to make it. Sometimes I'm not going to get him there, and so that's probably my number one hit on me as a manager. Is I'm probably only 60 to 75% successful at hiring the right person that's going to be successful in the job. So yeah, rep radar is something that I think everybody struggles with at some point in their career.
And what do you look for that when even though they might have a delightful personality and a great smile and handshake, but they're not going to figure it out?
Yeah. So my big thing is describe how your prospect is going to make their goals by using your product, right? So when I'm interviewing somebody, that's what I start to, I've been doing this the last probably 5 years, and it's been helped me a lot in finding people that are the right kind of people. Tell me about what you sold. Now tell me why you sold it, right? Yeah, you sold that big deal, and congratulations. That was a great commission check, and you went to club and you got on stage and you got a trophy, and that's all well and good. Okay, why did they buy though? I mean, really, why did they buy, right?
Yeah.
Because I've learned that if you really know your customer's business, you're probably going to be okay. You'll survive even some of the faults that you may have. But if you know the customer's business, you're going to do well, and that's really the number thing. And I think you said it earlier. Put yourself in the customer's shoes, right? So tell me, Miss young rep and up and coming guy, how did that work, and how did you do that?
That's it. Because too often you hear, what Adam Carolla calls a platypus.
Yeah.
So they take a platitude,
Yeah.
and they make it like the most important. Oh, it's all about relationships, all about value, all about ROI. And it's not that it's wrong. It's just not incomplete.
It's incomplete. Exactly.
Yeah, that it's a little bit of each.
It's all of the above.
The muffin's not just sugar, right?
Right.
There's flour, there's blueberries, there's heat.
Exactly. Exactly.
And if you lean on just one ingredient, you become good at that ingredient, but you miss the others.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I do think being a well-rounded salesperson is incredibly important. One of the things I like to encourage every salesperson, how much do you read, right? Listen to podcasts is good. So how much you do that, you should be doing that while you're driving in the car between appointments, right? But at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, I don't care which, did you read 5 articles in our business, right? So I'm in an IT technical space, right? So I'm like, I read at least 5, if not 10, new articles every day in my space, because for one, I don't want to get blindsided when somebody asks me a question that's something new, and there's always something new in my world.
Yeah.
But the flip side is just being good and well-rounded and understanding all the other things. And yes, we don't sell that one thing, but it might come up in conversation, and you can't look at the customer and say, I don't know what you're talking about because it's not what I sell, right? So you got to be more well-rounded than that.
Yeah, because I'm sure, because we've sold in similar spaces, you go into meetings and they all have their own language.
That's right.
Their own acronyms.
That's right.
And if you don't know at least some of them,
that's right,
you're going to feel like you're in a new country or something.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, and that also comes into the verticality of selling too, right? So if you've never called on banks before, you better, you might want to read up a little bit before you, or talk to somebody about, okay, what's banking doing in my space? What does banking care about? What are the terms that they're going to use? Oh, now I'm going to go talk to a manufacturer. Okay, what are they worried about, right? So those are all the things that a well-rounded salesperson needs to be able to do. And you need to be comfortable saying that I need to learn that as I go along, right? Because I'm not going to be expert in all those vertical industries, and I need to be a well-rounded person, and I just need to read. So I tell everybody, you better learn how to learn. I mean, that's a big deal. And you do that by listening to podcasts, reading the Wall Street Journal, reading the various magazines, getting online, just reading the stuff in your industry. You need to learn how to learn. It's very, very important.
And that's good advice, because people typically just say, read sales books. But I don't think it's just sales books.
I don't think so either. I've read them all.
Right. You can't read a book about basketball and become a better player, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
You learn the rules,
right?
You learn the mindsets, the attitudes, and some strategies. But you got to get out there, and this is the most complex game I think there is.
Yes.
Enterprise sales.
It is. And it's fun because it's just,
when it works.
It's fun, right? People ask me, why don't you sell something simple? I go, because I can sell something hard. And therefore I eliminate a lot of my competition just because they can't sell something hard, right? So the better you are at selling hard things, the easier it is to sell simple things too, right?
Yes.
So just practice at getting good at those things, practice at being a well-rounded person, practice at being a business person as well, and be able to relate to your customer in a way that they can be successful.
Cool. Hey, Shawn, where can people go to connect with you and learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So obviously you can send me an email at AgileStacks, which is Shawn, S-E-A-N, not seeing, Shawn, at agilestacks.com. That's a way to send me an email. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. That's where I met you, Brian, was on LinkedIn, following all your stuff and then subscribing to your podcast. And then I wrote a book on sales as well. It's called The Confident Investor and Eliminate Your Competition. So 2 books. So go to Eliminate Your Competition, EYC.com. And you can get a hold of me there as well.